Nadia's life was a picture of stability. At 52, she wore her age lightly, with the grace and allure that drew admiration from everyone who knew her. She had been married to Mark for over 25 years, a marriage that had seen its fair share of ups and downs but had weathered the test of time. Their son, Alex, was now grown and independent, building his own life with his girlfriend in a cozy apartment across town. For all intents and purposes, Nadia was content, even if the fire that once burned brightly in her marriage had dimmed to a comfortable glow. Weekends were Nadia's escape, a time when she would meet Alex and his friends at the local bar or host casual dinners where laughter and memories filled the air. It was at one of these gatherings that she met Julian, a charming, handsome man in his early 30s, a friend of Alex's who had just returned from a few years abroad. Julian had an easy smile and a way of making everyone around him feel special, but there was something in the way his gaze lingered on Nadia that was different from the polite attentiveness of the others. Nadia noticed Julian's attention, felt the quiet thrill of being seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. It was innocent enough at first, stolen glances, casual compliments, but each interaction added to a growing sense of danger, a pull that was both intoxicating and terrifying. She told herself it was harmless, a fleeting flirtation that would soon fade, but deep down, she knew that Julian stirred something in her that she thought was long dormant. One evening, after a dinner party at her house, Nadia found herself alone in the kitchen, washing dishes while the others chatted in the living room. Julian entered quietly, offering to help. As they worked side by side, the conversation flowed effortlessly, their laughter mingling with the soft clink of dishes. Then, in a moment that felt both inevitable and shocking, Julian's hand brushed against hers. It was a brief touch, almost accidental, but it sent a jolt through Nadia that she couldn't ignore. She pulled her hand away, a nervous laugh escaping her lips as she tried to regain her composure. Julian's eyes were on her, warm and knowing, and in that instant, Nadia felt something shift. She knew it was wrong, knew she was playing with fire, but the allure of the forbidden was powerful, and Julian's presence made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. The evening wore on, the guests eventually trickling out into the night. As Julian was about to leave, he lingered by the door, his eyes meeting hers in a silent question. Nadia hesitated, torn between the life she knew and the tantalizing possibility of something new, something reckless. The rational part of her screamed to step back, to shut this down before it went any further. But another part, a part she barely recognized, whispered that maybe, just once, she deserved to feel this alive. One time doesn't count, she told herself, her pulse quickening as Julian leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. It was a lie, a justification, but in that moment, it was enough. She gave in to the moment, to the rush of feeling wanted, desired. As Julian's lips brushed against hers, Nadia knew she was crossing a line she could never uncross. This was more than just a fleeting mistake. It was the beginning of a descent into a darkness that she was unprepared for, a darkness that would unravel everything she thought she knew about herself, her marriage, and the life she had carefully built over a quarter of a century. The next morning, Nadia awoke with a jolt, her mind replaying the events of the previous night. Julian's touch, his lips, the way he had looked at her as if she were the only woman in the world. It was thrilling, but now, in the harsh light of day, it felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. Mark lay beside her, still asleep, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing within her. Nadia tried to shake off the guilt, to remind herself that it was just one night, a brief lapse in judgment. She and Julian had stopped before things went too far. Just a kiss, nothing more. But the lie tasted bitter, a weak attempt to soothe her conscience. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. She spent the day in a haze, avoiding Mark's affectionate gestures, dodging his questions about her quiet mood. She couldn't bear to look him in the eyes, afraid that he would see the truth hidden behind her forced smiles. She busied herself with chores, hoping to drown out the guilt, but Julian was always there, lurking in the corners of her mind. She told herself that she would end it, that she would tell Julian it was a mistake and that they could never let it happen again. But the thought of seeing him again, A feeling that rushed one more time, sent a shiver through her that she couldn't deny. She hated herself for it, but the pull was undeniable. By the time Alex called that evening, inviting her to a casual dinner with friends, Nadia was already spiraling. She declined, feigning a headache, but the truth was she couldn't face Julian, couldn't trust herself to keep her distance. She needed time to think, to figure out what she wanted. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Julian's face, felt the memory of his touch. As she sat alone in the living room, the house quiet around her, Nadia realized that her carefully constructed world was beginning to crack, and she had no idea how to put it back together. Days turned into weeks, and Nadia managed to avoid Julian, dodging invitations and making excuses whenever Alex suggested getting together. She hoped that time and distance would cool the fire that had ignited between them, but the pull only grew stronger. She found herself checking her phone obsessively, hoping for a message from Julian, even as she dreaded the consequences. When the message finally came, her heart raced. A simple text, "Can we talk?" She stared at the screen, torn between the urge to respond and the voice in her head telling her to delete it, to end this before it destroyed everything. But the thrill of the forbidden, the allure of the unknown, was too strong to resist. She agreed to meet him at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, far from prying eyes and the familiar routines of her life. As she drove there, her mind raced with what she would say, how she would explain herself. But when she saw Julian sitting at the back table, his eyes lighting up at her arrival, all her rehearsed words evaporated. They sat in silence for a moment, the tension between them palpable. Julian looked at her with a mix of longing and regret, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. "I'm sorry," he finally said, breaking the silence. "I didn't mean for things to go this far." Nadia nodded, her own guilt mirrored in his eyes. "Neither did I," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She wanted to tell him it was over, that they couldn't keep doing this, but the words stuck in her throat. She didn't want it to be over, not yet. "I can't stop thinking about you," Julian confessed, his voice low and earnest. "I know it's wrong, but I can't help it." Nadia's resolve wavered. She knew she should walk away, should tell him that they had to end this now before it spiraled any further. But instead, she reached across the table, her hand finding his. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. She wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. Nadia's affair with Julian intensified, slipping into the shadows of her everyday life. She became adept at lying. Small, harmless lies that added up until she was tangled in a web of deceit. She told Mark she was going to a book club meeting, or that she was meeting an old friend for coffee, all the while sneaking away to be with Julian. Their meetings were secretive, filled with a passion that made her feel young and reckless again. They met in hidden corners of the city, where no one knew them, where they could be anyone they wanted to be. Each stolen moment felt like a drug, intoxicating and addictive, and Nadia found herself craving the next high. But the guilt never went away. It lingered in the back of her mind, a constant reminder that she was betraying the man who had stood by her through everything. Every time she kissed Julian, she could see Mark's face, could hear the sound of his laughter, could remember all the moments they had shared. It hurt, but not enough to stop. Julian, for his part, seemed equally conflicted. He would pull her close, then push her away, his emotions swinging wildly between desire and remorse. He would tell her he couldn't do this anymore, that it wasn't fair to her, to Mark, to Alex. But then, without fail, he would find his way back to her, unable to resist the pull that had drawn them together. Nadia knew they were playing a dangerous game, that they were balancing on a razor's edge that could cut them both deeply. But she also knew that she wasn't ready to give it up, not when she felt so alive, so wanted. It was as if she were caught in a current, sweeping her further from the shore of the life she had known, and she didn't know how to stop it. She told herself she was in control, that she could end it whenever she wanted. But the truth was, she was already in too deep. Mark was not a man prone to jealousy or suspicion. Throughout their marriage, he had always trusted Nadia implicitly, believing in the strength of their bond. But lately, something felt off. Nadia was distant, distracted, her laughter a little too forced, her smiles not reaching her eyes. She had become secretive, her phone always tucked away, her plans suddenly vague and unexplained. Mark brushed off his unease at first, attributing it to stress, or perhaps the inevitable changes that came with being together for so long. But as the weeks went by, the nagging feeling that something was wrong only grew stronger. He noticed the small things, the way Nadia would flinch when he touched her, the way she would pull away when he tried to kiss her. She was there, but not really, as if her mind was always somewhere else. One evening, Mark caught her typing furiously on her phone, a look of concentration on her face that he hadn't seen in years. When he asked who she was talking to, Nadia quickly put the phone down, her smile too bright, her explanation too quick. "Just a friend," she said, her voice strained. But Mark knew all her friends, and he had never seen her react like that before. He told himself not to jump to conclusions, not to let his imagination run wild. But as the days passed, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was someone else. He started paying closer attention, noticing the way Nadia's schedule had suddenly become unpredictable, her evenings filled with last-minute plans and vague excuses. One night, when she said she was meeting a friend for dinner, Mark decided to follow her. He told himself it was just to put his mind at ease, to prove that his fears were unfounded. But as he trailed her car through the winding streets of the city, his heart pounded in his chest, a sickening mix of dread and anticipation tightening his stomach. He watched as Nadia parked outside a small cafe, her movements hurried as she slipped inside. Mark waited, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. When Julian walked in a few minutes later, his expression lit with the same excitement that Mark had once seen in Nadia's eyes. The truth hit him like a punch to the gut. Nadia was cheating, and suddenly, everything made sense. Mark sat in his car, his mind reeling from the revelation. He felt sick, his chest tight with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. He watched them through the cafe window, their heads bent close together, their smiles easy and intimate. It was a scene that should have been comforting, two people sharing a quiet moment, but instead, it felt like a knife twisting in his gut. He wanted to burst through the door, to confront them, to demand answers. But he didn't. Instead, he drove away, his mind racing with 1,000 questions, none of which he was ready to face. He didn't want to believe it, didn't want to accept that the woman he loved, the woman he had shared his life with, was betraying him in the worst way possible. When Nadia returned home later that night, Mark was waiting. She walked in, her expression tired but content, and Mark's heart clenched at the sight. She had no idea that he knew, no idea that the walls of their marriage were crumbling around them. "Nadia," he said, his voice strained. She looked up, startled by the intensity in his tone. "We need to talk." Nadia hesitated, her smile fading as she took in his expression. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice cautious. Mark took a deep breath, struggling to keep his composure. "Are you seeing someone else?" The question hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Nadia's eyes widened, her face paling as the weight of his words settled in. She opened her mouth to deny it, to lie, but the truth was written all over her face. She didn't need to say anything. Mark already knew. "How long?" Mark's voice was low, trembling with barely contained anger. "How long have you been lying to me?" Tears filled Nadia's eyes as she realized the depth of the hurt she had caused. "Mark, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I didn't mean for it to happen." Mark's expression hardened, the pain of her betrayal cutting deeper than he could have ever imagined. "You didn't mean for it to happen?" he repeated, his voice rising with each word. "You're cheating on me, Nadia. You've been lying to me, to Alex, to everyone. How could you?" Nadia's tears flowed freely now, her shoulders shaking with the weight of her guilt. She reached out to touch him, but Mark stepped back, his face a mask of hurt and anger. "Don't," he snapped, his voice cold and unfamiliar. "Just don't." They stood there, the silence between them filled with all the things they couldn't say, all the hurt and betrayal that had brought them to this moment. Mark turned away, his hands clenched into fists, and Nadia knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed were a blur of pain and confusion. Mark moved into the guest room, creating a physical distance that mirrored the emotional chasm between them. They spoke only when necessary, their conversations stilted and strained. The house, once filled with the comfortable rhythm of their lives, now felt cold and unfamiliar, each room a reminder of what they had lost. Nadia threw herself into work, trying to drown out the noise of her shattered marriage. She ignored Julian's calls and texts, unable to face him now that everything had fallen apart. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it, alone. She missed Julian, missed the way he made her feel, but more than anything, she missed the life she used to have, the one she had so carelessly risked. Mark, on the other hand, was consumed by anger. He couldn't look at Nadia without seeing her betrayal, without feeling the sting of her lies. He avoided the house as much as possible, finding solace in long drives and late nights at the office. He didn't want to see her, didn't want to be near her, but he also couldn't bring himself to leave. Not yet. Alex, sensing the tension between his parents, tried to intervene, but neither Mark nor Nadia could find the words to explain what had happened. They were too caught up in their own pain, too lost in the wreckage of their marriage. Alex grew frustrated, unable to understand why the two people he had always looked up to were now so broken. Nadia and Mark were stuck, unable to move forward but too stubborn to let go. The love they once shared was still there, buried beneath layers of hurt and betrayal, but neither of them knew how to find it again. They were caught in a limbo, trapped in the aftermath of their choices, and neither of them knew how to escape. One evening, after another silent dinner, Nadia couldn't take it anymore. The weight of her guilt was crushing, and she knew she needed to say something, anything, to try to make things right. She found Mark in the guest room, sitting on the bed with his head in his hands. "Mark," she said softly, her voice trembling. He looked up, his eyes red and tired, but he didn't say anything. Nadia took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she tried to find the right words. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." Mark stared at her, his expression unreadable. "Sorry doesn't fix this, Nadia," he said, his voice cold. "Sorry doesn't change what you did." Nadia nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know," she whispered. "I know I hurt you. I know I broke your trust, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I am sorry. I'm sorry for everything." Mark sighed, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world was on them. "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Why did you do it?" Nadia hesitated, struggling to find the answer. "I don't know," she admitted. "I was lonely. I felt lost. And Julian, he made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. It was stupid and selfish, and I never meant for it to go this far." Mark looked away, his jaw clenched. "I thought we were okay," he said quietly. "I thought we were happy." Nadia's heart ached at the sadness in his voice. "I thought so too," she whispered. "But somewhere along the way, we lost each other. And I'm so sorry that I didn't see it sooner." They sat in silence, the enormity of their situation settling over them like a heavy fog. Nadia wanted to reach out, to hold him, to tell him that they could get through this. But she knew that it wasn't that simple. They were broken, and no amount of apologies could change that. But for the first time in weeks, they were talking. It was a small step, but it was something. And maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of finding their way back to each other. The next few weeks were a slow, painful dance of trying to rebuild what had been shattered. Nadia and Mark attended couples therapy, awkwardly sharing their feelings with a stranger who probed into the depths of their pain. It was uncomfortable, raw, and often felt like they were peeling back scabs on wounds that hadn't healed. But it was necessary. Mark struggled with his anger, the betrayal gnawing at him every time he looked at Nadia. He vacillated between wanting to forgive her and wanting to walk away from it all. He couldn't understand how she had let things get this far, how she had risked everything they had built for a moment of fleeting passion. Nadia, on the other hand, was racked with guilt and regret. She had hurt the one person who had always been there for her, the man who had been her partner through every joy and hardship. She didn't know if Mark would ever be able to forgive her, but she was willing to do whatever it took to try to make amends. Their sessions were filled with tears, accusations, and moments of uncomfortable silence. They confronted the ways they had failed each other, the cracks in their marriage that had gone unnoticed for too long. It was grueling, but slowly, a glimmer of hope began to emerge. One night, after an especially difficult session, they sat in their car, the air thick with tension. Mark stared out the window, his mind far away, while Nadia fiddled nervously with her hands. "I don't know if we can fix this," Mark said finally, his voice heavy with resignation. "But I don't want to give up. Not yet." Nadia looked at him, her heart swelling with a fragile hope. "Neither do I," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "I want to try, Mark. I want us to try." It wasn't a declaration of forgiveness or a promise that everything would be okay, but it was a start, a decision to fight for their marriage, even if the path ahead was uncertain and fraught with challenges. They had a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, they were taking those steps together. As the weeks turned into months, Nadia and Mark slowly began to rebuild their life together. It wasn't easy. Trust, once broken, was not easily mended. There were days when the hurt felt too raw, when the memories of Nadia's betrayal loomed large, casting a shadow over their progress. But there were also good days, moments of connection that reminded them of why they had fallen in love in the first place. They started spending more time together, making an effort to reconnect in ways they hadn't in years. They went on dates, rediscovered old hobbies, and tried to find joy in the little things. It wasn't perfect, and there were times when the old wounds would reopen, but they were committed to making it work. Nadia made a point of being open and honest, something she had struggled with in the past. She wanted Mark to see that she was willing to change, that she was willing to fight for their marriage. It wasn't about making excuses or justifying her actions. It was about taking responsibility and doing whatever it took to earn his trust back. Mark, for his part, worked on letting go of his anger. It wasn't easy, and there were days when he felt like he was drowning in it, but he didn't want to be defined by his pain. He wanted to move forward, to find a way to forgive Nadia, even if it took time. They leaned on each other in a way they hadn't in years, finding strength in their shared commitment to rebuild. It was slow and often painful, but each day they chose. The weeks of therapy and rebuilding had begun to yield results. Nadia and Mark were learning to communicate more effectively, finding new ways to connect, and slowly rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. Their interactions were no longer fraught with the same tension and suspicion, and while their relationship was far from perfect, it was beginning to heal. One afternoon, Nadia was in the kitchen preparing lunch when the doorbell rang. She opened it to find Julian standing on the doorstep, his expression a mix of apprehension and determination. Her heart sank as she realized that he had come to confront her, and she knew that this was a moment she had been dreading. "Julian," she said, her voice faltering, "what are you doing here?" Julian looked past her, his eyes scanning the familiar surroundings. "I needed to see you," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "I didn't know how to leave things without a proper goodbye." Nadia's heart ached at the sight of him, but she knew she couldn't let him in. Not now, not while she was trying so hard to mend her marriage. "Julian, please," she said, her voice pleading. "This isn't a good time." Julian's face was etched with regret. "I understand," he said quietly. I wanted to apologize. I never meant for things to get this complicated." Nadia felt a pang of sadness, a reminder of the connection they had shared, but she also felt a surge of determination. "I appreciate that," she said firmly, "but I'm working on fixing things with Mark. I need to focus on that right now." Julian nodded, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I'm sorry for everything," he said again, his voice soft. "I hope you find a way to make things right." Nadia watched as he walked away, the finality of their goodbye settling over her. She closed the door with a heavy heart, feeling the weight of the past few months pressing down on her. She knew it was time to fully commit to the path she had chosen, to fight for her marriage with everything she had. With Julian's departure, Nadia and Mark focused even more on their healing process. The presence of Julian, though painful, had provided a much-needed catalyst for their transformation. They threw themselves into their therapy sessions with renewed vigor, determined to make their marriage work. Nadia began to take concrete steps to demonstrate her commitment to Mark. She was transparent about her whereabouts, made a concerted effort to re-establish the intimacy they had lost, and engaged in open and honest conversations about their feelings and fears. She realized that actions spoke louder than words, and she needed to show Mark that she was truly dedicated to repairing their relationship. Mark, too, worked on letting go of his anger. It wasn't easy, but he started to focus on the positive aspects of their marriage, the reasons he had fallen in love with Nadia in the first place. He tried to be more patient, more understanding, and to recognize the effort Nadia was putting into their reconciliation. They began to rebuild their routine, incorporating small rituals that brought them closer together. They started cooking dinner together, taking long walks, and spending quiet evenings reminiscing about their early days together. It was a slow process, but each small step felt like a victory. As the months passed, the healing continued. The trust that had been fractured began to mend, and the love they had for each other started to overshadow the pain of the past. They learned to forgive, not just each other but themselves as well. It was a journey of rediscovery, of finding their way back to each other. One night, as they lay in bed together, Mark turned to Nadia and smiled. "I never thought we'd get here," he said softly, "but I'm glad we did." Nadia squeezed his hand, her heart full. "Me too," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "I'm grateful for every moment we have, and I'm committed to making the most of them." It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a hopeful one. They were learning to love each other again, to appreciate the second chance they had been given. And for now, that was enough. As the seasons changed, so did the dynamics of Nadia and Mark's relationship. The initial pain and betrayal had transformed into a partnership built on trust, understanding, and mutual respect. They had learned valuable lessons from their ordeal and were determined to build a future that was stronger and more resilient. They started to explore new activities together, finding joy in shared experiences and discovering new facets of each other. They took a cooking class, started gardening, and even went on a spontaneous trip to a nearby town. Each new experience brought them closer, helping to solidify the bond they had worked so hard to rebuild. Nadia continued to focus on being present and attentive in their relationship. She made an effort to communicate openly with Mark, to express her appreciation for him and the life they shared. She was committed to creating a positive environment, one where trust and love could flourish. Mark, in turn, worked on being more emotionally available. He tried to be more responsive to Nadia's needs, to listen without judgment, and to be supportive in her endeavors. He recognized the effort she was making and responded with his own efforts to strengthen their connection. Their relationship was no longer defined by the betrayal, but by the journey they had undertaken together. They had come through the storm and emerged stronger, with a deeper understanding of each other and a renewed sense of purpose. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Mark took Nadia's hand and looked into her eyes. "I know we've been through a lot," he said softly, "but I'm grateful for every step we've taken together. I feel like we have a new beginning." Nadia smiled, her heart full. "I feel the same way," she said. "We've been given a chance to start over, and I'm committed to making the most of it." They held each other close, their hearts aligned in a shared vision for the future. It was a future filled with hope and possibility, a testament to their resilience and love. As the years passed, Nadia and Mark continued to grow and evolve together. Their relationship, once fraught with pain and betrayal, had transformed into a partnership built on trust, understanding, and mutual respect. They had navigated the complexities of their past and emerged stronger, with a deeper appreciation for each other and their shared journey. They often reflected on their experiences, both the good and the bad, recognizing the lessons they had learned along the way. They understood that their relationship was not perfect, but that it was theirs, unique and precious, shaped by their struggles and triumphs. Nadia and Mark continued to nurture their connection, finding joy in the everyday moments and celebrating the milestones they achieved together. They took pride in the fact that they had faced their challenges head-on and had come out the other side with a renewed sense of commitment and love. Their relationship was a testament to the power of forgiveness and the strength of the human spirit. They had learned that true love was not just about avoiding mistakes but about growing from them, learning to navigate the complexities of life with grace and compassion. As they looked back on their journey, they were grateful for the second chance they had been given. They knew that their path had not always been easy, but it had been worth every step. They had built a life together that was rich with meaning and purpose, a life that was a reflection of their shared values and dreams. In the end, Nadia and Mark found contentment in the knowledge that they had faced their struggles together and had emerged stronger and more connected. Their love was no longer defined by the pain of the past, but by the resilience and hope they had cultivated along the way. Nadia and Mark's story was one of redemption and renewal. They had faced the darkest moments of their lives and had emerged with a renewed sense of purpose and commitment. Their relationship had been tested, but they had come through stronger and more united than ever before. As they looked to the future, they were filled with optimism and hope. They knew that life would continue to present challenges, but they felt confident in their ability to face them together. Their love had been forged in the fires of adversity, and they were ready to embrace whatever came next with open hearts and unwavering support for each other. They continued to cherish the everyday moments, finding joy in the simple pleasures of life and celebrating the milestones they achieved together. They remained committed to nurturing their relationship, to growing together, and to building a future that was filled with love and meaning. Nadia and Mark's journey had taught them the importance of resilience, forgiveness, and the power of a shared commitment. They had learned that true love was not just about the absence of conflict, but about the ability to navigate it with grace and understanding. As they looked ahead, they were excited for the new adventures and experiences that awaited them. They knew that their path would not always be smooth, but they were ready to face it together with the strength and love they had cultivated over the years. In the end, Nadia and Mark's story was a testament to the power of love and the capacity for change. They had faced their challenges, overcome their struggles, and built a future that was bright and hopeful. And as they walked hand in hand into that future, they knew that their love was strong enough to carry them through whatever lay ahead.